Hey everyone, I feel like we have a tough gig just before lunch, so thank you for bearing with us. So I'm Ruth and this is Sarah. I'm a lecturer in psychology at York St John University, and I broadly work around understanding the kind of more diverse experiences of eating disorders, and that's what we're going to talk about a little today. So specifically, we're going to talk about these experiences in minoritized or marginalized communities and how VR might help us understand those experiences a little bit better. So as I'm sure everybody is aware, the vast majority of research into eating disorders focuses on the SWAG population, which is an acronym for slim, white, affluent girls. And the measures that we use are also typically designed and validated in that very specific group. So measures like the Eating Disorder Examination Questionnaire was designed and validated broadly in white women of a certain age, of a certain educational status. And that kind of makes us ask the question, well, if they have been designed in such specific groups, are they useful for people who don't fall inside that specific group? And if the measures that we are using, so in such a widespread way like we see today, if those measures aren't fit for purpose, then potentially our conclusions about who gets an eating disorder and what those eating disorders look like are not representative of people's true experiences, which always leads me to think, how useful is evidence-based care, which is so important, if the evidence that we're basing it on isn't representative of a wide range of experiences? And when we think about representing diverse people's experiences within research, often we start to think about accessibility. So how do we, as researchers, make the research we do representative of the diverse range of experiences that come under the umbrella of disordered eating? And how do we as researchers make taking part in our research accessible to those different groups of people, right? Not everybody has access to the internet to take part in things. Not everybody can afford to spend hours filling out questionnaires if they're not going to get paid. Not everybody can access information in the same way. Maybe their neurodivergence means that they can't access questionnaires in the same way that we put them on Qualtrics, for example. Usually the way that I personally deal with this within my research practice is through co-production. So going back to the communities that we want to work with and basically asking them to help us. So we know that this isn't accessible for you. Can you help us make this more accessible? But basically what I'm broadly told is that we just put too many barriers in place for people. There are too many hurdles that people have to jump over in order to take part in research. And that might be, like I said, around disability. It might be access to technology and an online platform. It might be the ability to engage in unpaid work. It might just be literacy and language skills. And it might also be the use of non-affirming language. So one specific project that we have done recently is called the Does My Body Count project, which was a project that aimed to look at disordered eating experiences in trans, gender non-conforming. So we know from co-production work in this area with charity groups that body image concerns and disordered eating are incredibly prevalent in trans and non-binary people. But there is not really any research that looks into exactly what these experiences are, how are they different from these experiences in cisgender people, and what are the motivations for these experiences. So we got a very small pot of money from the Institute for Social Justice at York St John University, and we basically asked a big group of people to complete the EDEQ, which we paid them for, and also to potentially take part in a semi-structured interview with us, which we also paid them for. And from that information, we've got a paper in prep that looks at what exactly these patterns of disordered eating are. But we also worked with a local community to make a zine, the cover of which you can see there. So it was a zine made by a trans artist in Leeds, and it basically is a way of sharing and disseminating our findings from the research with the community themselves. So trying to move away from just academic dissemination and move towards community dissemination. So if anyone would like to have a look at that, then let me know and I can send you an email copy. But even in co-produced projects, we probably miss things, broadly because we're constrained by the methods that are available to us. So Sarah, in her recent slides to me, made me aware that most people only have 11 seconds to describe their experiences to a clinician. And also that, particularly within the eating disorder work, we're relying on language to describe these embodied experiences that we have. And that can be really difficult for people, particularly for people who are marginalised in a different way and might not have access to the same kind of power resources that other people have. So Sarah and I are collaborating to consider what XR might bring to the ways that we explore disordered eating in minoritized communities. And now I'm going to shut up so she can say the interesting bit.
Oh, thank you. Such an honour to be here. I'm just so in awe of all of you and the amazing work that you're doing. I'm a little bit of an outsider to this. So I'm a creative producer working in the field of immersive technology. So alongside this project, which has been in development for about 8 years now, I also am the founder of something called the XR Health Alliance. We wrote a report in 2020 called The Growing Value of XR in Healthcare in the United Kingdom that really outlines all the different ways that VR can be used in health and well-being, from pain management to mental health or patient education and beyond. It's all available online. The report also led to a £20 million investment into XR for mental health. The funding is out at the moment, and they have a particular interest in eating disorders and weight disorders as well. So encourage you to look it up. But this project has actually been in, like I said, in development for some time, and it actually harks back to about 10 years ago when I was working as a curator at the Big Anxiety Festival, which is an arts and mental health festival in Australia. And it was there that I was putting on an exhibition about how VR could be used to talk about lived experience, but also how it could be used therapeutically as well. And I really wanted to do a project about my own lived experience of psychosis. I really wanted to talk about how it feels to be a patient being given antipsychotics when actually I felt like I just needed to be listened to. And thinking about the kind of ways that you can struggle with really expressing your experience when you have that limited time to explore what you're doing, what you're going through. And it was there that I came across this fantastic arts and health research method called body mapping. I don't know how familiar people in the room are with body mapping, but it's this beautiful process where traditionally you would trace around your body on a large piece of paper and go through a mindfulness experience and imagine, what does my anxiety look like in my body? What does how do I experience bulimia in my body? What are those feelings or sensations? And do they have a colour or a texture? Are there words that you could use to express that? So this image in the top left here is a patient talking about how they used it to express their experience of psychosis. And so I had a go at this, but I'm a terrible artist. I can't draw at all. And I was like trying to express all these like big feelings and they just weren't coming out. But I was also really enamored with this world of VR. And it was around that time that I discovered a video that's probably not going to play now. Nope, not going to play. But a 3D drawing experience that was created by Google. And so you put on a virtual reality headset, you have controllers, and you can paint in 3D. And it's still just like the best experience to me. You can paint with fire and electricity and water, and it's animated and it just feels great. And so I was curious what would happen if you made body mapping 3D, and if you could actually acknowledge the spatial experience of being in a body and draw not just on the skin or inside the body, but outside the body as well. And I was like, how hard can this be? 7 years later, here we are. So this was a very early prototype where we just got a gender neutral avatar. I have a lot to say about body representation in VR that we don't have time for today, but would love to talk to you about. And I showed this to my oldest friend. I've known her since I was 3 years old. It still feels quite emotional talking about it publicly. And I said, hey, I'm like doing this VR thing. Do you want to try it out? And I said, what does it feel like on a good day? Could you imagine like what a good feeling feels like? And she really struggled with it. And eventually, after a lot of prepping, drew this illustration on the left. And then she was like, I really want to draw my body dysmorphia. And it was really interesting seeing the two side by side, and that she talked about not actually feeling it was in her body, but feeling surrounded by joy. But with her dysmorphia, then it was really kind of in her stomach. She talked about these arrows of being pointed at a lot, and when she's being looked at when she's out in public, and feeling watched, wanting to scribble out her face. And that, like the quote says, that she feels like there are different parts of her body that become like a collection of objects and little parts of me feeling different things. and I don't feel whole. I don't feel like one person. And then 3 years later, I asked her to have a look at this in the summer and say, is this still what you're feeling? And it was really lovely for her to hear from her that actually she said she feels like she's managing a bit better, and that when I start looking at it, it's like, oh yeah, I remember that feeling. I remember that feeling very sort of intense. I think I was going through a particularly bad period. Perhaps it does kind of show that I have days less extreme as this. And so I'm really interested in this as a tool for tracking experience over time and how it could be used in that process as well. So it's come along quite a lot since then. We actually have a demo that you can try. Here are just some of the scenes that I'm hoping don't play the sound of my voice. But we've broken it. We've been working with a series of artists and researchers across neuroscience, clinical psychology. We're actually starting a social prescribing pilot today in Maidenhead Library about how can we use this broadly to have conversations with the public and make it more accessible. And it's broken down into these 4 key scenes, where you have an embodiment scene, where you can kind of be invited to be mindfully aware of your body, that you bring your body into that space. Then you get to create your illustration as well. So we've been thinking about what do different emotions and sensations look like in the body? How can we animate it? Can you draw with electricity or fire or kind of growing animated blobs that move and build up that artwork? Then you can embody it. We haven't developed this for an eating disorders community, so this may not necessarily be the most ideal, but what happens when you step into that drawing and can move it in different ways, and actually at the end of the scene you can shake it off and all those drawings fall off of you. And then the key piece of feedback that we've also gotten is that there is therapeutic value in knowing that you are not alone. And so if you consent to, then you can anonymously add your drawing to this ever-growing terracotta army of lived experience. And you can see your artwork alongside other people's as well. At the moment, we've been developing this as a well-being experience, but we're really keen in collaborating with researchers and academics and healthcare professionals and people who've lived experience in this space to think about how we could adapt or improve it and really find a home for it, because I see value in having this as a public engagement tool. I'm so happy we're doing it in a library and aligning it with social prescribers in the Windsor and Maidenhead area. But also I want to put this in city squares and put it on a massive billboard in Times Square and say this is what eating disorders feel like, but also how it can be used in that therapeutic dialogue, how a patient can say, this is what's going on for me right now. It is emotional, it's physical, it's social, it's psychological, and thinking about how we can bring that all together to see a whole patient. So I think I've spoken for too long. Thank you so much, and please do come have a try of our prototype as well. I'd be really interested in your thoughts. So thank you.
Do we have any questions? Anyone? Claire.
Mine was more of a slightly practical question. Were people observed while they were in the VR headset, sort of representing themselves, or were they kind of quite private?
So the way that we've set it up is like privacy is so important for things like this. So it's quite fun trying to work out how to do this in a library, but we've created private booths that you can go into. It's still an open space, so we warn people that you can be overheard. And the way that we are onboarding people is saying this is a well-being experience, but only share what you feel comfortable sharing as well. So I think what we're doing in terms of the public engagement work is very different to what would be done in health care as well. So what we're doing is sort of splitting that experience into what is something that's a kind of introduction to, hey, our feelings are real and we can visualize them and talk about them. And then we're working with social prescribers on how to kind of signpost them to support and potentially embed it in that practice. But then healthcare work requires a totally different approach. So
I'd like to talk to you about that more.
Great.
Any other questions? Anywhere? shout out if you want to ask a question. Then I will ask a question. It's obviously a very powerful tool. Have you had any people who have got so overwhelmed with emotions that they've become distressed or have found it hard to sort of step back out of it?
So one of our pilots that we did was in a hospital where they're working with chronic pain patients. And it was the first time that this patient had illustrated their experience of pain, but also they started to draw the emotional pain that they were experiencing as well. And so often we see them as two separate things. And I think it was quite confronting for him. And so it ended up creating a very different conversation with his consultant pain nurse about that, and that he was asking for more support, particularly with his mental health, which ultimately I see as a good thing. But I think that is where there needs to be a framework developed around this. You need a qualified clinician to be able to work with them so that there is a whole kind of process considered around it. And I think that's where we've been trying to work out the creative elements and the scientific elements and what is appropriate for a public engagement version. But we've done a lot of training around how to support people in those processes, working with clinical psychologists, so there is safeguarding in those contexts, and then the research is obviously facilitated in a different way.
Thank you. Okay, anyone for a very final question? No, you need to wait for the mic, Carol. Okay. I just need to hold up.
So I think in terms of acceptability, there is a lot of really fantastic research out there showing that generally people are open to it. I think that it's not for everyone, and to say that this is like the silver bullet that's going to solve everyone's problems would just be inappropriate. But I actually also work as an end-of-life doula and do some work in working with older people, and they love it. I think we have this like assumption that VR and games is for like young men, but actually, like, you know, there's such an art to this whole world of storytelling, and I think that as long as you really care for people through that process, you make them feel safe, you give them somewhere private, and you explain what is going to happen and that you can stop at any point. So I think it's really about how you create that whole experience. But yeah, I've had like 100-year-old women like giggling on a beach listening to David Attenborough. So yeah, there's appetite, but not for everyone.
Thank you so much, both of you, for a wonderful presentation.